There are different types of profiles of people that you want on advisory boards. So there's the operators, the CISOs and CIOs, if you will, that understand use cases in enterprises. The second way to measure it is the advisory board helping with deal flow, right? Are they making the right introductions to customers or strategic partners?
SC Media is proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Each month, the CISO Stories program explores a cybersecurity topic selected by Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community and provides content that examines that topic from a variety of perspectives. Hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, best-selling author of CISO Compass, the CISO Stories weekly podcast features content powered by the 1,100-plus members of the Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO community. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Bob West, Managing Partner at West Strategy Group. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Todd. Good to see you.
Good to see you again. And our listeners always like to hear, what was your attraction to cybersecurity?
Back in the Paleozoic era, around 1994, I was working in technology at Citi in Chicago, Citigroup, and I received a call from a recruiter, told me about a security consulting group that EY was forming. Back then it was referred to as Ernst & Young, and my interest was piqued. It was right around the time that the internet was being connected to commercial businesses and online transactions were beginning, and it piqued my interest, and spoke with the team at EY. We liked each other, and that was the launching point. It just happened to be fortuitous. There wasn't a plan, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and it's turned out pretty well over time.
You mean there was a time when we didn't have the internet?
So amazing but true. That is correct. I was actually the second person in the E&Y office in Chicago in 1995 that was connected to the internet, and just building on that. So there were 3 or 4 of us that when we joined the firm, we weren't working on projects, and so the mothership told us, go figure this internet thing out and see if we can wrap some security services around it. And it was a completely different time.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember those times when people had to justify why they needed the internet, which seems funny today. I mean, now it's like, you talk to any teenager today, and if they're in any place that doesn't have Wi-Fi, we have a problem that needs to be addressed right now.
Yeah, and for you kids playing at home, our internet connection, I believe, was a T1, and if memory serves me correctly, I think it was like 1.44 megabits per second was the transmission speed. And now, I have a gigabit connection here at home, and there's a rather large difference in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I almost ended up at Ernst & Young. I actually interviewed earlier on to a company called Arthur Young.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, and we know where the Arthur and the Young came from. But so today we're going to be talking about advising cybersecurity companies, keys to smoothing the path for growth. So can you explain what the role of advisory boards is in helping these cybersecurity companies grow?
Yeah, absolutely. So when an advisory board is formed, you typically bring people that have different skill sets to the table, right? There'll be people that are very deep in products. There will be people like myself that have had experiences as CISOs. I'm fortunate that I've had a combination of experiences in enterprises. I've consulted with EY, Deloitte, and on my own. I've had a couple of product roles. And so I can look at things from multiple lenses. But one of the main goals of an advisory board is to help crystallize a message so that the company can accelerate its revenue. And that can manifest itself in a number of ways. So, for example, uh, on the customer side, I'm fortunate that I know a number of chief information security officers and CIOs in large enterprises. I also know a lot of people that would be logical strategic alliance partners when you think of the Deloittes, EYs, Accentures, et cetera. And I've also, I forget how many advisory boards that I've been on. I think I've been on 12 or 13 at this point. But I can look at the organic growth cycle of a startup now, and if I can tell them, here's the move that you need to make in terms of building the right team, engaging a good marketing and communications company. Um, Here's the strategic alliances that you need to form, and here's the right people within those organizations to speak to. Um, Here's a cross section of CISOs who are early adopters in emerging technology, and so when you wrap all of that together, that's the recipe for growth. And the places that I don't know the answers, I don't know the answers, and I'll point the company in the direction of someone that can fill a particular niche, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it helps with, having that network to bring into the advisory boards to help those companies grow.
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. Oh, and the investors, of course. Because I've been on a number of advisory boards, I know a good number of the venture companies, venture capital companies that invest in cybersecurity companies. So there's this whole, because you kind of need money to grow a company, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how do the advisory boards help these cybersecurity companies scale from their startup phases into larger companies?
Yeah. So good question. A lot of it is, the starting point is telling a good story around a product. I was talking to a company the other day that has a fabulous technology, but their their message is a little rough. So fundamentally, if I as a company can't communicate to you, Todd, what our value proposition is and how it fits into an enterprise, it's going to be tough to sell a product, right? So fundamentally, that's the starting point. You need a good team as a company. So I will typically work with the founders and investors to identify some talent. Um, Again, I've worked in cybersecurity for close to 30 years, and so I have my relationships that have had the opportunity to establish and maintain over that period. Um, and then I typically suggest that they don't approach prospects from a sales perspective. I like to get validation about a concept before there's a formal sales conversation. And if it so happens that there's a need for it, then it transitions pretty quickly. But it's really important to validate the fact that what you're bringing to market is something that enterprises need. And and then, for example, the way most companies scale is through strategic partnerships, and Siebel Systems, for example, is a classic example where they tied themselves to Accenture, and they scaled their revenue very, very quickly. At the time, for sure, it was one of the fastest growing companies in the history of venture funded technology companies. So that is a really important relationship. But one of the challenges that founders and venture funds typically have is it takes a fair amount of time before revenue comes in. The general expectation is that plan on it being a couple of years before you actually see revenue from a strategic partner, specifically the global systems integrators. But when the revenue begins to come in, it's big. And so you have to have the patience and really understand that you have to make an investment of time to make sure that you're working with them and hopefully a good number of people so that everyone across the board understands the value proposition. And the ideal scenario is that one of the strategic partnerships that you establish is a logical acquirer. So it could be, Microsoft or Google or Palo Alto Networks, Zscaler, et cetera. Um, so there's this whole recipe that you follow that if you execute the steps properly, it's going to lead not just to organic growth or growth by acquisition, if it makes sense, but the logical outcome, whether it's an acquisition or IPOing.
How does a venture capitalist really look at these different opportunities and decide what's really good? Because my understanding is, 10 to it's the 5 to 10% of the startups actually succeed.
Yeah. So you're right. The venture funds go on the assumption that one or two out of 10 investments will flourish and make up for the ones that don't succeed. The general process is they'll listen to a pitch, and if they like the pitch, then they'll dig a little bit deeper. So if the idea makes sense, one of the next questions they'll ask founders is, "What's the addressable market?" Right? I have a product. If you're well, so one market, for example, could be the global 2000. So that's one large market. So what if every company in the global 2000 market bought this type of product? What's the addressable market? So let's say it's $1 million a contract times 2,000. Then that's the addressable market. And one of the things I've heard consistently from the venture funds is that they invest in people, right? They're going to take a bet on a team that not only has a good idea but has the ability to execute and form the right team around them. So there are ways that you can minimize the risk. I think the final one then is, when I look at my advisory boards, I go with proven entrepreneurs, leaders that have built more than one company and have a track record of successfully executing on a number of companies. So that's a general lens that the venture funds look
Mhm.
at opportunities through.
Mhm. I half the time I live in Dublin, Ireland, and half the time I'm here in the Milwaukee, Chicago region. And I rent office space in a place called Dogpatch Labs in Dublin. And there's about 400 people and about 50 different startups. And it's a whole ecosystem of helping those companies, thrive. Uh, and I'm always amazed. I'm working around these people that are, I'm just renting space there to do my thing,
Yeah.
but they're building companies, and some of them have became very successful. The San Francisco version of Dogpatch Labs created Instagram.
Mhm.
That came out of that, and there's some other large organizations that have been built. So, what sort of size do you see is typical in the cybersecurity space for companies that are having these advisory boards?
How many people are typically on
Yeah.
an advisory board? It varies a lot. Uh, Gosh, I remember. So when Trusteer came to market, it was 2006 or 2007. It was Howard Schmidt and I that were on the advisory board. Uh, I am on a couple of advisory boards right now that have a dozen advisors. Uh,
And what size would you say the companies are themselves that are starting out in the cybersecurity space and before they get to that stage where they need an advisory board?
yeah. So when Cipher Cloud was formed, I was an advisor from the concept phase. There was no product. There was a thesis in terms of the cloud security market that companies would buy security products to protect um, cloud environments, particularly the SaaS space, software as a service. So generally speaking, it's like security, right? The ideal scenario is you build security into products, into business process, and if nothing else, when you're at concept phase, running ideas past people that have a good understanding of the market is a great idea. I mean, the sooner the better, I guess, is the
Mhm.
general message.
Mhm. So, what sort of people are looked at for advisory boards? So we have a lot of CISO listeners, and I know there, some of them are thinking, okay, what sort of CISOs would be on boards, and how do they pursue those opportunities?
Yeah, good question. Um, I'm thinking back. I'm hopping in the Wayback Machine to 2005 when I joined my first advisory board, and I remember Peter Meakin from what was then Trident Capital reached out to me, and we were doing some what he thought were interesting things at Fifth Third when I was CISO there, and they were bringing a company called Tricipher to market. It's a multi-factor authentication company that VMware acquired. Um, so I think it's a similar type of thing that when venture funds are investing in a company, they want people that are proven, that understand the market. In my particular case, at that point in time, I'd had a couple of CISO roles, so understood how to get things done within a large enterprise. I'd also done consulting, so I also had that lens. My sense is that it was more the former skill set that Peter was looking for at the time, um, and I think people that are willing to take a chance on early stage companies. I remember back, Todd, if you remember Internet Security Systems or ISS, I met Tom Noonan when he was a number two employee in September of 1995, and that was the period where I was at EY, and there were three of us that sponsored bringing in ISS into EY. We were actually the first company, and there was a project I worked on that we were the first ones to use ISS's vulnerability scanning tool. So I think of what it really means is that I'm a glutton for punishment, because when I had my subsequent roles at Bank One and Fifth Third Bank, took bets on a number of early stage companies that were solving fundamental problems. Um, so I think part of it is really identifying who are the people that are willing to take bets on early stage companies. That would be one part of it, and I think you need to balance it out into you look at the early adopters, you look at people that are next in line implementors. That's typically where venture funds and founders look for advisors.
Mhm. What sort of problems do you think that we have today that are those unsolved problems that would be opportunities for cybersecurity companies?
There's a couple that come to mind right now. I mean, everyone is dealing with ransomware, right? Um, and there's a couple companies that are coming to market to deal specifically with ransomware. You think of the problems that, I mean, I go back to like Colonial Pipeline as an example, where it's not just an impact on revenue, but there was a broad macroeconomic impact on the East Coast. For those of you who aren't familiar with Colonial Pipeline, they distribute energy products, and they were the main distributor of petroleum and gasoline on the East Coast. So there was a couple week period where no energy products were being distributed, and people could literally not fill their cars with gas. So that would be an extreme example. I look at healthcare, for example, especially hospitals right now, they're a logical target for ransomware gangs because you have an option as a hospital, right? It's you pay the ransom or you run the risk of people dying. So, as a hospital administrator, if I were a hospital administrator, it'd be a very easy decision, right? In terms of I would write the check every time, um, because people dying on your watch is not a good prospect. And I think the other thing is generative AI. So all, I have not spoken to a company that isn't doing something with generative AI, whether it's in a test lab or there's broad implementation of it. And one of the biggest challenges right now is understanding are the right conclusions being brought to the table by AI engines, right? Generative AI engines. Um, for example, there were a couple of attorneys that have done research and brought legal precedent to the table with case law, and as it turned out, they were fictitious. And the other concerns I have there's a couple of them, but what happens if the AI engine is poisoned, right? Um, is it in fact coming to the right conclusions, or are the conclusions something that an adversary or bad actor wants it to reach, right? There's a number of issues right now. So I see a market for companies that are creating guardrails, if you will, to make sure that AI engines are staying within these boundaries, right, and not going outside of them and creating fundamental issues.
Yeah, it's almost like if we look at it in a security context where we have controls, we prevent things, but where's the detect piece of AI to see that we're actually within those, that we're within those parameters, and
Yeah,
versus just blindly trusting the AI. I think that's a really good point.
yeah. I think back to intrusion detection systems that came to market in 95, 96, right, where if you don't know that unusual activity is happening, you're not going to be able to take action, right? And I see a similar dynamic in the generative AI space right now.
Yeah. So how do we measure the effectiveness of advisory boards as far as, how are they helping cybersecurity companies and how are they helping the other enterprises that are using these products?
Yeah, a couple ways. One of them is, as I was telling you, there are different types of profiles of people that you want on advisory boards. So there's the operators, the CISOs and CIOs, if you will, that understand use cases in enterprises. The second way to measure it is the advisory board helping with deal flow, right? Are they making the right introductions to customers or strategic partners? Another way would be, are they contributing to the product roadmap? Are there unforeseen things that the product team isn't necessarily thinking about? If nothing else, validating that the concepts that the product teams are bringing to market make sense. Those would be the general categories that I would lump them into.
Mhm.
You know, the message I hear continuously from the venture community is the most important thing, and almost exclusively the thing that matters, is deal flow, right? So are there contracts that are being signed? Is revenue accelerating? Those are the most important metrics for any venture backed company.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I've been on a few advisory boards, and I find it's also very rewarding because it's in some ways it's not to sound too altruistic, but it's almost a way of giving back. It's taking that experience that you've accumulated all these years and providing some guidance to these companies that are going to help protect us in other ways someday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of back in my Cipher Cloud days, um, CipherCloud was the first cloud security company to come to market. Maybe not necessarily the most successful, but it was the first one. And that was right at the beginning of the broad digital transformation journey that we've been on, moving to the cloud, fundamentally enhancing digital experiences for customers. And I think there's still a number of people that don't understand that whether your information is being hosted at AWS or Google or Amazon, or you're using a SaaS application, it's still your responsibility as an enterprise to protect that information. You may not necessarily be able to have a hands-on role in that, but ultimately it's your responsibility. And so bringing that class of products to market fundamentally makes it a more secure environment to operate in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this has been great. What final advice would you give to new CISOs, current CISOs, experienced CISOs, or emerging CISOs, as they're thinking about advisory boards and also those organizations that are thinking about leveraging advisory boards?
Yeah, a couple things I would recommend. One of them is, think of the conversation we've just had, right? When you're looking at advisory boards, there should be a composition of people that have enterprise experience, product marketing, et cetera. And so, number one, asking yourself, do you have the practical experience? It's a rhetorical question if you're a CISO, right? Because that's what you're doing, right? You have the responsibility to protect an enterprise. I would be putting my thinking cap on in terms of understanding not only what are the current issues that you're dealing with, but what do you see coming down the road? It's hard to predict that sometimes, though, because if you think generative AI, for example, we've been living with it for less than a year and a half. And who would have predicted that generative AI would have had such traction in broad adoption? But really understanding, what could be the different scenarios, right? I think back 15 years ago when nation states were becoming a really significant issue. Just thinking about all those different things. What are the gaps? What are the problems that you have that you can't solve as an enterprise? Those are the types of things I would be thinking about were I a CISO or CIO that has aspirations to be on an advisory board.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Thanks for taking the time today, Bob. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.